I'm always fired up when we get to visit with our next guest from On Texas Football, CJ Vogel. Follow him on Twitter at CJ Vogel underscore OTF. What's up, man? How you doing? How was the trip to Columbus, Ohio? And glad you made it back safely. No black guys, nothing like that.
No, it was actually well, first it was a very fun trip. It was nice to get a break from the hot weather down here, but no, I thought it was a pretty tame weekend from the Buckeye fans I came across. So altogether, I was expecting more of those Philadelphia Eagle type college football fans. Maybe I was just in the wrong areas.
Well, I mean, when they lead for most of the game, it's probably a little bit easier than when you're trailing or when Vince Young and Lima Sweet rip your heart out.
Yeah.
I asked Anthony Hill on Monday. I was like, Big House or the Horseshoe, and he said Horseshoe. He said he could not hear anything on the field. What was your relation to that? How did you compare it to the Big House? Of course, Texas scored pretty early in that game to quiet the crowd, but Big House or Horseshoe for you? Because were you at the Big House last year, right? I believe we visited with
Yeah.
you outside the Big House last year.
Yeah. I made both trips, and look, both are some of the best stadiums you'll find in all of college football. I'll tell you what, uh, loudness, stadium atmosphere, all goes towards the Buckeyes.
Hmm.
Campus environment, the campus itself, all goes to Michigan. Now, what makes a difference in terms of playing an actual football game? I argue, the stadium impact and the noise factor that goes to Ohio State. I'll tell you what, I've been on the road for Texas games for about 2.5 years now. That fourth quarter, when Texas was trying to come back down 14, that was as loud a stadium I've ever heard. Was that Buckeye Stadium on that fourth down stop against the Texas offense at midfield. That was unbelievably loud. I can only imagine how loud it was on the field for those players, and evidently there was a communication breakdown, I would assume, in large part due to that communication and that noise.
Yeah, that's on the fourth down play, the right side, Brandon Baker, that's kind of blowing up on Twitter. I've heard a lot of good takes this week, CJ. I read a lot of bad takes on Twitter, and I'm sure you have on your message boards as well, talking about Arch's first start. And I think because he's been in this program for 3 years, we saw him make 2 starts last season. I think there was probably more of an expectation for him to play better, especially nationally, but also I think with us Texas media as well. But there were some points made. Joel Klatt, Danny Cannell, 2 former quarterbacks, talked about that they weren't surprised that he played so bad, considering it was his first true road start. 100,000 people screaming bloody murder. You mentioned the communication issues, 4 new stars on the offensive line, some new receivers out there. How are you feeling about a week removed from Arch's first start last week against Ohio State?
Yeah, I think expectations are still very high for Arch, and deservedly so. Look, again, there's talent on this Texas offense, and until Emmett Mosley gets back, I think that's the actual conversation: is how much talent is around the Texas wide receiving unit at the moment. But again, Texas ran the ball well. I think that offensive line altogether really impressed and encouraged a lot of folks around the facility. But for Arch, I think the big thing is, hey, if your offensive line is going to play that well, whether it's the run game or protecting him against Ohio State on the road at Ohio State, you need to trust that unit, right? You need to trust the big guys up front that they're going to get that job done. And that was really the big takeaway for me, having watched it a few times, is I don't think Arch really trusted his offensive line. And look, I go back to that Georgia game. That was the last time that we saw Arch in an extended series for multiple snaps. And, no one trusted that offensive line against that Georgia front. And so I, came to the idea, and kind of my, final takeaway is that he was probably anticipating a very similar game style from Ohio State. Constant pressure up front, not being able to really develop the routes down the field and go through his progressions. He checked down much earlier on Saturday than we ever saw in his starts in 2024. On top of that, I thought he got a little skittish, as evidenced by the sidearm throws, his footwork not following the direction of the routes that he was throwing to. That tells me that internal clock, again, was entirely sped up, and, it's going to take time. Fortunately, these 3 next opportunities for the Longhorns at home will serve as exactly what he needs to get that internal clock up to speed and up to what he expects from those guys up front before Texas goes on the road to Gainesville.
Yeah, he just never looked comfortable,
Yeah.
right? And that was the big takeaway for me. Even the first drive, he rolls out to the right. I don't know, it was Wingo or Moore cutting across the field, but when you saw him getting ready to throw, you thought 15-yard completion. It's a throw that, we've seen Quinn Ewers make a lot, and it came up with 5 yards short. And to me, that was an okay.
Mhm.
Either his shoulder just came out of socket, or maybe he has a little bit more nerves than we thought. And I think because of his last name, the expectations, we kind of assume, oh, he'll be fine. He's ready for this moment. When in reality, well, he's never been in a moment like this. He mentioned Georgia, A&M, but he had never had to start a game like that, never had to prepare a full season leading up to a game. And obviously, probably the biggest season opening game, I think, in college football history, especially in the modern day. You mentioned the receiver part of it, because I've been super high in this receiver room. There's so much talent here. Incredible receiver class coming in with Khalil Lockett, Jamie French, McCutcheon, Butler, Michael Terry, so many guys, Emmett Mosley. But it felt like last week, leaving that game, does Texas have a number one wide receiver?
Oh, you leave a big question there. Now it should be Ryan Wingo, and I think by the end of the year it unequivocally will be. DeAndre Moore very much in that conversation as well, and I think we were all encouraged by the playmaking ability, the 50-50 catch ability of Parker Livingston vertically down the field. That's a solid basis. Now you're going to need someone else to join that group, but to your question, who is that wide receiver one? It was Ryan Wingo on Saturday a week ago. Texas tried what they could to get Ryan Wingo the ball. And I know that you look at the stat sheet and you said, well, they didn't do a good job. And it's like, well, yeah, no one on the offensive side of the ball really did a good job against the Buckeyes on the season opener. But the way that plays are designed, the way that Arch is looking for his reads, primarily to Ryan Wingo, he's going to be the guy that sees the bulk of, those pass attempts from Arch Manning. The big thing for me, who becomes a guy that Texas can dump down a screen to and create 10 to 15 yards after the catch? Because we know that they have the physical size required on the outside to spur guys loose, but is there a guy that can create tackles for missed tackles forced? As we talked about, we saw the little dump downs to CJ Baxter out of the backfield. That's great. But a year ago with Jaden Blue, those are extended plays that are going for 20, 30 yards. So that's my big question. Who can create with the ball in their hands versus who ultimately becomes the guy that catches a lot of passes? I think those two answers are a whole lot different at the moment.
Yeah, we've seen what Sark can do with guys with speed and space. You mentioned Jaden Blue, who was fantastic at it. Xavier Worthy. I think a lot of red zone issues were solved because Xavier Worthy was so quick that cornerbacks just weren't going to be able to defend him one-on-one in the red area. Okay, you mentioned the offensive line, and this might be the answer to this question, but we've had all the negative talk. Let's find some positive talk here. What was a player or positional group that you left Saturday going, oh, okay, I feel much better about this player or this group going throughout the rest of the season? And why?
Yeah, look, I'll start with that offensive line. No rush attempts resulted in negative yards. Now there was a few, obviously, that resulted in 0. A few of which were on those QB sneaks that ended up not, faring well for the Longhorns there. But only 1.5 sacks, only lost about 3 yards on those 2 plays. I thought Texas's offensive line up front did a great job on the road. Again, the miscommunication that hurt. I think now you're kind of getting a sense of how important communication will be, especially when you go to Gainesville, when you go to Athens later on this season. But that unit was really impressive, as well as the defensive line. And I thought that Texas would have enough talent there. How quickly would they get up to speed to kind of mirror that of what we saw in 23 and 24? Well, the answer's there. Texas has 5 or 6 guys that they can roll through deeply at that defensive line spot and see consistent play all the way throughout.
Yeah, I think, because this year it was kind of going in like, okay, man, Texas is replacing a lot of big guys up front on the defensive front. I think now we just got to give Kenny Baker the benefit of the doubt, because it doesn't matter if they have 7 new transfers coming in. That D-line looked just as good as it did last season against a real good Ohio State offense.
It truly did. And, again, I know a lot of folks are going to look at the pass rush and say, well, where was the pass rush? Ohio State didn't give Texas a lot of opportunity to throw to really pin their ears back and rush the quarterback. But what they did do is give them plenty of opportunities to see how they fit up in the run game. And for the longest rush of the day to be 8 yards, sign me off. I approve.
Heading into this game against San Jose State, where there's going to be ample opportunity this week and the next 3 weeks for a lot of guys, including Arch Manning, to get some reps, including guys who did not play against Ohio State. I thought Sark, kept it pretty tight in terms of rotation. think we only saw one freshman receiver. It was McCutcheon, and he said on Monday that the next guy up would have been Ryan Niblett. Offensively and defensively, who are some of the younger guys or guys who do not play against Ohio State that you're looking forward to seeing tomorrow in these next 3 weeks get some more reps before conference play begins?
Yeah, I'll start at running back because I think that's a really intriguing position. We only saw two backs on the field in Columbus. It was C.J. Baxter. It was Trey Wisner. It's kind of what you expected coming into this big game. But Christian Clark is that next guy for me at that position. And if he really emerges as somebody that the staff can trust, not only is he a threat out of the backfield in the passing game, but he allows Texas to get very multiple should they go into 20, 21, 22 personnel with two running backs on the field, something that they did not do on the road in Columbus. So he's the one guy offensively I'm excited for, especially if Texas starts to really pivot its personality and identity offensively to a pound and ground game with Arch Manning really benefiting from play action. Defensively, it's Jonah Williams. And, it's how could it not be? We saw how much of an impact he had on the diamond. Now on the gridiron, where he's probably a more natural playmaker, if he gets into that rotation, and becomes a guy that Texas can rely on, it's going to be very difficult for him to not see the field consistently and very often, even in SEC play.
Talking with CJ Vogel from On Texas Football. Is Jonah the one guy you get asked the most about on y'all's live streams and message boards? Is Jonah
He's
Williams?
got to be. And there's such an allure to him. He's a 5-star, 2-sport freak. Where is he? When can we see him? Folks want to get eyes on him, and hopefully it's this weekend.
What was your season prediction before Ohio State, and has it changed at all after the loss?
Yeah, I had 11-1 originally, lost to Georgia in Georgia, and look, I still want to sit there and say that it's going to be a 10-2 loss to Georgia, but Texas needs to prove that over the next 3 weeks. And again, I know that it's not against great competition, but at least check the boxes and have me sit back and say, okay, what maybe didn't show up on the road in Columbus has been remedied. We've seen the bright spots. We've seen the step taken on both sides of the football. Defensively, I thought Texas was well ahead of the offense. Obviously, I don't need to really go into too much depth there, but 10-2, I think Texas right now, and for Sarkisian specifically, it's not so much a talent issue, but it's a coaching matchup issue. I think Kirby Smart, with the way that he kind of schematically goes about playing a Sarkisian offense, it's more problematic for Texas there than it is from a talent perspective.
Yeah, I had 11-1 also. I think with that loss, maybe the floor was a little bit lower for me now, maybe 9-3. Because if Arch was rattled against Ohio State, Gainesville, if Florida can find a way to be undefeated going into that game, that's going to be an insane environment. And then also Athens as well. Georgia, Kirby Smart might just have Sark's number here. What'd you think of LSU? Win, Garrett Nussmeier, and then also Alabama's loss? Because, week one, there's going to be overreactions, but I'm just curious if maybe that changed your perception of the SEC and how it plays out now. Because after week one, I think the biggest riser was LSU and Garrett Nussmeier in terms of the national perception, and a lot of people are now picking them to the best team in the country and to win the SEC.
Yeah, I'll start with LSU. First off, if that defense is legitimate, that's a big threat to all of the SEC. Again, Nussmeier being a veteran guy, having seen as much time in college football as he has, he's going to perform well on the big stage. We know that. LSU has talent around him, and they have talent in the backfield alongside him, especially with Caden Durham. I'm a big fan of his speed. But if that defense is legit, and it looked to be just that at Clemson, that's a big, big threat for the Georgias, the Texases, and the Alabamas, who, look, I just planted a flower on their grave at the beginning of the week. I think they're done, and that was a team I predicted to go to the SEC championship to face Texas earlier on in August. So I don't see the Alabama physicality. I don't see the toughness that was a staple under Nick Saban. And if that's the case, how do you then get that mentality back, having lost your season opener in such embarrassing fashion? That's a tough, slippery slope if you're Alabama to tread. And right now, I don't think that they make it to the top of the hill. I think that's a dangerous season ahead of them unless someone in that locker room kind of takes the reins. And it's not going to be Kalen DeBoer. It's got to be someone player-led and say, hey, this is not the Alabama standard. So I'm buying LSU, selling Alabama. Ultimately, I think that's something I didn't expect coming into 2025.
Yeah, I think Caden Proctor gave up 6 hurries in that game, which is just insane because he could possibly be a first-round draft pick.
Oh, yeah.
Last thing for you. Was last night's Cowboys loss the most obvious loss in NFL history? Like, did you at any point think Dallas was going to win that game?
No, until the field goal right before half, because you stayed, 1-1 in terms of scoring. And I say that, I didn't expect the Cowboys to get a stop all evening. Evidently, that second half they came out and they were fantastic. But they went into halftime down 1. And I said, okay, you're on par, because they haven't looked like they've been able to stop the Cowboy offense either. Now it's basically a race to who gets the next stop. And in turn, it turned into who got the next score that won the football game. Cam, that was the ultimate worst case for me as someone who watches the Cowboys. Because I came in, we've talked about this. I did not want to have any expectations for this Cowboy season. I just wanted to go with the flow. I'll watch the games. I'll root for them if they win. But ultimately, the expectations were in the dirt. And now I'm sitting around saying, well, that was a pretty darn good game. They looked good when they had Kenny Clark on the field. They had some lockdown cornerbacks. They didn't allow the explosive play outside of the one. They bottled up Saquon Barkley. And now I'm sitting here thinking, you know what? Maybe they got a team. Maybe I've got my expectations rising again. And that's a dangerous spot to be in as a Cowboy fan.
It's exactly what Jerry Jones wants you to think. Is like, oh, okay, you know what? I'm back in. I told people today, just don't fall for it.
I took the bait. I'm like the SpongeBob character playing with the hook. And the next thing you see is I'm going all the way up to the surface because I've been caught. They got me.
CJ Vogel, thanks so much for the time, brother. Thanks for stopping by. Tell the folks where they can watch and listen and read you today and tomorrow before San Jose State and even after the game.
Yeah, absolutely. We're over on YouTube, youtube.com/on Texas football, as well as on texasfootball.com. We'll have everything broken down for San Jose State and beyond for the Texas season.
Thanks, man. We'll see you tomorrow.
Absolutely, guys. Y'all take it easy. Happy Friday.